Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to Virtual Plant Clinic with David Yost. I'm Kristen McKenzie, and I am fortunate enough to be taking this meeting on my back porch. Sorry, David, you still have to be in the office. Uh, so David has a great presentation set up for us today, and this will be webinar format. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A, and I will be sure to gather them, and David has some pauses for questions. So with that, David, go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. And yes, Kristen, I am a little bit envious. It's a beautiful day out and I'm sitting in a studio. But anyway, at least vicariously I can live through your screen there and I get to hear the birds singing and that kind of thing. But it has been really nice this week and it's gotten a lot of people inspired and coming in the garden center, and that's fantastic. Always good to see everybody. I wanted to take today to talk about growing vegetables and herbs. For me, I think this is like one of the most rewarding aspects possible. There's just something, again, that's so important, in my opinion, sort of participating in our own food production, even if we're not feeding our families, even if we're just growing a few herbs to put on the table for the salad or something. At least we kind of give this awareness of where our food comes from, and it does provide us that special connection. I used to have a big garden. Now I've got a small garden. So again, I don't spend a whole lot of time, don't have a lot of time and space for growing vegetables, but I always want to put something edible out there. So that's what I'm encouraging you to do, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. My choice of vegetables, the way I put this together is kind of random. I just sort of put things together sort of the way my brain is working. But I really do want you to participate. Send your questions in to Kristen, share your ideas, your suggestions. This is always a great opportunity to learn from each other. So I'll start out, like a lot of times, with several slides. About halfway through, we'll stop, take some questions, make sure we're kind of all together and having a good time, and then we'll continue with a few more slides, a few more questions, that kind of stuff. So again, thanks for being here. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and just sort of jump into my first slide. And let's see. All righty. So vegetables. This is like the good stuff that we're all talking about. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers. Technically a lot of these things are fruits, but we're going to lump them under the sort of the vegetable and herb category. So these are all what I talk about now. We are beginning to transition into the warm season vegetables. Our climate is such that we go from a very cold winter this year, sort of a dreary, cool spring for a large part, and we are growing cool season vegetables. We're in that transition time, and April can be a little dicey where we start moving into the warm season vegetables. So a lot of our warm season herbs and vegetables thrive in the warmth of our late spring and summer, but these are sensitive to frost conditions. So the timing is what I'm talking about right here. If I use here in Fairfax County, right where I'm sitting right now at our Fair Oaks location, if I say April 20 is our average frost date, what that means is on April 20, we are now at a point where it's like 50-50 chance of having a frost. We've kind of made it through the most of it, and we're now moving towards spring. But there is still a possibility of having a frost or even a freeze. That can even go as late as well into May. So over the period of the next 4 weeks or so, we have this sort of game that we play as the gardeners of where we want to get started on growing our warm season veggies. And I want to encourage you to do that. And I'm doing some myself. But we also have to know we're not completely safe yet. We could still have some cold temperatures come in unexpectedly. We have to be monitoring and watching. And if that occurs, we got to have a plan in place, or how we're going to react to that. Does that mean, hey, if a cold night comes, am I able to cover and protect some of my tender plants? Are they in pots? Can I move them indoors? But we want to be prepared for that kind of situation should it come up. So some people will play it safe and say, hey, I'm going to wait another week or two, and plant when things are a little bit warmer. Some people would say, I'm ready to get going now, but I got my plants in place. And I'm just telling you, this is sort of that kind of fun, experimental, sometimes disappointing part of gardening, where you try and figure it out. And it's a learning process. I just thought of this as I started talking again, my diversion. I was helping a customer a couple of weeks ago, and they were buying a fig plant and stuff, and we had some freeze damage we're talking about. And they asked why their tomatoes died. I was like, tomatoes? He said, yeah, I really, really love tomatoes. So I planted some in March and they died. And so then I planted some again and they died. And I was like, well, here, this new gardening, I said, the deal is you can't really grow tomatoes in March. You're going to have to wait. Usually like we do this kind of a May time period or something, early May, maybe late April. So we're in that window now. Anyway, enough of that. So when we talk about these warm season vegetables, the conditions where they really thrive, we want to make sure that we provide the ideal environment for them. So I'm saying their happy place is a sort of 70 to 80 degrees in the daytime, maybe 55 to 75 at night. We are right in that sweet spot right now. The other is they need warm soils where soil temperatures are like 60 to 70 degrees. I just checked before coming on this program, just 10 minutes ago, I checked. And right now here in Fairfax, our what call our 5-day average soil temperatures right at about 71 degrees. So the kind of weather that we've had here the last several days, this is ideal, but we also know that weather changes. And that can always provide us with a lot of challenges that go on there. So what happens is, again, we take that leap of faith, we start planting and growing these things. We have to continue to monitor and watch things. And I feel like now, as our weather is so unpredictable, we really have to be nimble. We have to be ready to adapt, change, move with whatever the weather's throwing at us, and using all this experience, try to get some nice produce out of it at the end of it. So it's not easy, but that's one of the things that really makes it rewarding also. Some of the things that we deal with are also, I was talking about being too cold, but we have problems where it can actually get too hot. That's part of I'm saying warm season vegetables. If 70 and 80 is their sweet spot, then we're at 90 and 100. That kind of goes the other extreme. And this is kind of the stuff that we run into in a lot of sort of what I'm talking about. I also put this website up here, Greencast Online. That's where I get my soil test or my soil temperature information. Because if we start talking about, is the soil warm enough to plant? Is it warm enough to put seeds in there? We're going to germinate. I've been using this website for several years, and I found it to be pretty reliable where they are monitoring the soil temperatures throughout the country. You sort of put your zip code in there and you get some good data in there. So this is all a place where you get good information on what your next step is in the garden. So I'm thinking back a little bit like last summer, how we suddenly, everything was looking, we had this sort of cool, wet spring. It stayed really nice through May. And then in June, we suddenly jumped up to extremely high temperatures. We know that if it's too cold, the plants linger, just sort of sit there. They don't grow. They're not thriving. If it gets really cold, then they get injured from it. The other extreme we talk about when it's too hot, we start seeing a whole host of problems that can come with this. When I talk about some of these environmental issues that go, and this is just excessive heats that leads in there, of when we have really high nighttime temperatures, for example, when our nighttime temperatures are staying above 80, which can often happen to us in the months of June, late June, July into August. Well, what happens on like tomatoes, and this is like America's favorite homegrown vegetable, so I'm focusing on tomatoes, one of my personal favorites too. But you will see that plants will react to that sometimes by dropping their flowers. So of course, with the way this whole works, we got to get our plants growing, thriving, putting ideal environmental conditions, which is a warm, sunny place, if I didn't mention that, generally at least a minimum of 5 to 6 hours of sun, and more is better. but we need to get them flowering. And then we also have to have bees come by to do the pollination for us. So if we have really high nighttime temperatures and it causes those blossoms to drop, that means we're also getting a loss of yield that's in there. If we get those flowers to bloom, then we also need to see these get pollinated. Plants that are in this family, the Solanaceae or nightshade family, they have kind of a unique structure to their flowers. These little, it almost looks like a little cluster of bananas dropping down out of the flower. That is where the pollen is actually contained. And they require bees to come through, and they literally have to shake the pollen out of here because the plant, it's conserving, it's holding pollen. This is food reserves for them. And they're holding that pollen in there. So we rely primarily on bumblebees, are our best native pollinator. They come in and they literally have to shake and rattle that flower, get the pollen out of it. You can see that's what they're doing. They're creating, they're storing up, they're putting pollen into their saddlebags here that they'll take back as food for their young, but also do the pollination of transferring that pollen to other flowers so we can set fruit that's in there. So we got to have just the right conditions where, hey, it's not too hot, it's not too cold, get enough sun, the flowers bloom. We've got to have insect pollinators in the garden to do this pollination for us. That has been kind of an issue because our insect populations are on decline, because of all the urbanization and things, our human impact that's in there. So I have, in some cases, people that are actually going out, and I'm recommending, and I have people that are doing hand pollination just to assure this actually gets done. So we get through this whole kind of process, and I'm like, okay, I got the right environment, I set it, the weather's favorable, I get it to bloom, I get the insects, we get the pollination, and then we have to actually get the fruit set on here, right? I'm emphasizing it, I'm kind of going this down so we see it's a process, it's a sequence of events that are going. As this fruit starts to ripen and it starts to enlarge, it also has to have the proper nutrition and the proper water environment that's in there. When you see this happen, where the end of the fruit, the furthest end of the fruit is attached here, but this bottom end of it, it starts to turn black and does not fully develop. That's a physiological disorder that's called blossom end rot, right? What happened in this case is that fruit, as it's developing, as it's expanding, it has to have a consistent flow and availability of calcium. If the calcium is not there, or if something interferes with the mobility of calcium in there, then the bottom of that fruit never will develop. So sometimes people bring this in trying to understand what disease is it, but in this case, I'm saying it's an environmental response to the conditions that are there. So it's good when we're growing, again, this would be tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, any of these plants that peppers, I think I said that already, squash. We want to make sure that we have calcium in the soil, which means usually we add a little bit of lime to that. It also means that we need to maintain a steady, kind of consistent amount of moisture. What happened in this case, which I know firsthand because these are my tomatoes, we all have these same problems. This occurred because of dry conditions. So everybody looks at this and says, oh, it's just blossom end rot. You need to add more calcium. There was plenty of calcium in this soil. I know that because I put it there. But in this case, as the fruit was expanding, I inadvertently allowed the plants to get dry. When the water is not consistently available, it's not moving, the plant's not able to transport the calcium, and that end of the fruit fails to develop. So I'm kind of just launched right into the problems, but I'm trying to stress the environmental issues and the process that actually goes on. It's trying to say it's not an easy thing, and there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong. So here, when we start to see fruit cracking or splitting, that's usually a situation of excessive water, right? So it's like you can't win at this game sometimes. You'll have tomatoes that start to ripen up, and as they're ripening and as their skin starts to get a little thick, you can have a sudden thunderstorm or something come in where then suddenly a lot of water comes into there and that fruit just absorbs the water so much that the skin will crack and split on it. These are not pest issues. These are all environmental and cultural things. So as gardeners, what we're trying to do is kind of manage the environment as best as we can. This is also why we see commercially more and more of our food being produced in a controlled environment in greenhouses to try to circumvent some of these problems. And if that's not enough, if you actually get to a ripe tomato, then this is squirrels. Get there first, right? Uh, One thing that I've done, because I don't have an answer for you on squirrels or a good solution, but sometimes what I'll start to do now is if I get a fruit, it's kind of this point where it hasn't fully ripened, it may not mature, I might have to go out there and harvest it at that point, let it ripen up inside. It's not exactly vine ripened, but still gives a good tomato, because I'm afraid once I get to this point, I'm either like the squirrels are going to get it, or the weather's going to cause the fruit to crack or split or something like that. This can also be influenced a lot by what varieties we're choosing. So it's a challenge. And because of the irregularities and unpredictability of our weather, we just don't really know what's going to happen from one year to another. This is just sharing my little story. So last summer was a disaster, and not just for me. I talked to lots of gardeners every single day. I mean, everybody had trouble with their tomatoes, because we had that heat dome that kicked in right there in June and early July, 90 and 100 degrees. Our tomatoes, they think yeah, they're from Central South America, they're warm season, but they're really not equipped for constant 90 and 100-degree weather. So plants were getting beat up, they were suffering, not a lot of fruit set. This is one that had to volunteer grow in my backyard. And then I had not corn, but the tomato hornworm come in and eat and strip all the foliage off of it in here, right? So this was, you can see this picture was taken August 3rd last year. So it was pretty miserable conditions. I was ready to give up, and I know a lot of us did. But I thought, hey, I'm just playing around, having fun. My diet doesn't depend on this. I said, well, what I'm going to do instead of giving up, I just cut this plant back. I said, all this stuff is gone. The worms had their way with it. The weather had their way with it. I came in, pruned all this stuff back, pruned it back down at about this height. Well, unexpectedly, the weather changed. Well, we know it's going to change. We just don't know what change is up to. But then it turns out, so I cut it back in August. November and December turned out to be really nice. And so here I'm going back. So in November, I'm harvesting tomatoes, and a lot of these held up really well as far as storage. And this little inset picture here, these are tomatoes that I had in December. So I'm a little bit not bragging, but just saying I was eating homegrown tomatoes all the way right up to just about Christmas. That is unheard of in our climate, and it's not supposed to happen that way. But what I'm learning from this whole thing and trying to share with you is, like, we just got to be able to adapt, change, and go with whatever the weather and nature's setting us. I think all the old rules that I've been living with for my life kind of don't apply now, and we just, as gardeners, we just have to kind of enjoy it for what it is, adapt, go with what changes. This, I can't remember the exact year I took this tomato plant. This one grew up, you can see, taller than I am. That one plant produced over 100 fruit for me on that year, on that one plant. So I'm trying this again, saying is, hey, we have good years, we have bad years. A lot of it's driven not by what we do, but by what the weather does and what word practices are in conjunction with it. And we just got to stay nimble, stay aware of what's going on. Again, you can see I'm like a container gardener grower. I'm just growing these. I've got a couple earth boxes going, tomatoes, peppers, sprinkling a few marigolds. But again, this is like a good year. All this is like one I've harvested like 3 times as many peppers. This was my first of 3 harvests that came off of 2 pepper plants out of an earth box. That was a good year. We don't always talk about the bad years. This certainly was not the case. Last year, I think I got 2 peppers. It's just we roll with the flow. But this is what's worked for me when the weather cooperates. I like to use a mix that's about 75% our Maryfield potting mix. I'll put bumper crop in there, which I talk about a lot, as a as an organic soil conditioner put in there and also add some nutrients. Now, in addition to making sure we're all set up with our culture practices, our watering, our environment, the weather we talk about in great detail, tomatoes have entire books written for tomato diseases. So this is the other thing that will get you. The most common, most difficult, and destructive disease that you're going to run into growing tomatoes in our area is this late blight. Phytophthora is a pathogen I talk about a lot because it does a lot of damage and affects over 1,000 different plants. Late blight will often start up in a foliage or leaf, and it just kind of looks like this. That's why I say blighted. It's not a specific spot. It's just an area that sort of generally starts to wither and die off. What's bad, if you look at this, it gradually moves back into the stem. You can see where it gets into the vascular tissue. It will continue to progress, and then when it starts getting into the main stem of the plant, it kills your tomato vine. No going back on that. It also will get in the fruit, causing the fruit to rot in there. So it's a serious disease. I think our best way to manage that is it's also keep in mind it's a water mold, so it really thrives in wet conditions and moderate temperatures. So I want to try and maintain good air circulation so the foliage doesn't stay wet for a prolonged period of time. It allows air to move through there, dry it out, space plants out. So again, they have good sunlight, good air movement that's in there. When I mentioned here, our first line of defense is always going to be sanitation. It persists in old plant debris. So if you had previously lying in the bed, if you've got old rotting tomatoes or dead plants or had this plant, we want to do a cleanup, a sanitation that's in other areas. This is why I like to keep the soil covered and protected with a mulch to prevent some of the splashing, because some of these pathogens, it lives in the soil and old plant debris. You can splash and move on to that, like we talked about, the good aeration and drainage. So we're do all our cultural practices right. If in spite of all these efforts and nothing else is working for you, then we can go the route of fungicides, right? So Daconil and Mancozeb are two of the more effective treatments that are available to you. If you decide to go the fungicide route on there, copper is considered a natural or organic treatment. So if you're following those practices, copper is an avenue that's available to you. Doesn't work quite as well, but those are again trade-offs and decisions that we make with it. So again, my goal really is I'm trying to set everybody up for success with good cultural practices so we can avoid the fungicide route. But if it gets to that point, know that there are options available. Septoria, this is another fungal pathogen that's quite common. It's not as destructive, and what you can see is it is specific spots. Where we looked at the late blight, we have this sort of general blighted discoloration. Here, again, fungal leaf spots. So this is bad because it gets in there, causes the leaves to yellow, less production, photosynthesis from the leaves there. It will get onto the fruit, causing spots and blemishes on the fruit, but it doesn't actually kill the plant like the blight does. Essentially, it's a different pathogen, but our control measures are the same, where we're going to go after sanitation, trying to manage our leaf wetness. And if everything else fails, then we sort of go the route of using sort of the fungicides. Great. So I'm gonna give a quick profile on cucumbers, and then we'll take some questions. So if there's anything you want to clarify or add to the conversation, please be sending those in to Kristen. But let's switch gears. We gave a lot of time to tomatoes, and that would also be inclusive of peppers and eggplants in the same family, have similar kind of cultural conditions. But cucumbers, which are in the squash family, cucurbit family, which again kind of pertains also to squash and melons, fall into this group together. This is another, to me, fantastic crop to grow. I think, I sometimes when parents are coming in or children are there, you got kids have their food preferences, but everybody seems to like cucumbers, and cucumbers grow fast. They produce quick, kind of a very rewarding thing. I love them myself personally, but also it's something you might, engage kids with gardening. put this little picture here because there are a lot of varieties, different types of cucumbers. This is a little compact one that's called Space Master. So even if you're limited on space, because again, these plants are vines, they grow, they sprawl, they take up a lot of room, which is one thing that I don't have to work with. This is pretty cool. This is a pickle type cucumber, which is what I like. If you look at this, it's what I call the internodes. If you have a vine that's growing, you have a flower, 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 so on. What they did, the length of those nodes is much more compact. So instead it goes flower, 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 flower. So you get this very short kind of stubby vine that's on there, but it's still producing a standard size pickle that's on pickle cucumber on there. So again, just you could work these in your garden. And this point, I was just trying to see how it would do in a window box. I get a few cucumbers. I'm not picking bushels, but I'm getting handfuls. And it's just a really fun, rewarding thing to do. Encourage you to do that. Again, this 75, 85 degree temperature. So we're at the early stages of this. You could start now, but you got to be prepared to go with the flow, what the weather happens, keep an eye on that. And the other thing I want to put in here is cucumbers that sort of have, they grow in, you get suddenly a bunch of cucumbers, get really nice harvest that might last a couple of weeks. And then after that plant has peaked, it kind of starts to deteriorate. Rather than trying to keep that deteriorating, declining vine going, I would prefer to do what I call succession of planting. So if I plant, a couple cucumber plants, I wait, 2 to 4 weeks, I plant another cucumber plant. I wait 2 to 4 weeks, I plant another cucumber plant. So as this plant A starts to fizzle out, I'm not going to struggle with it. I'm just going to toss it aside, move on to plant B. Plant B starts to fizzle out, discard that, go on to plant C. So if you have the space and can do that, to me, that's the solution. That's really the best way to be growing cucumbers that are there. It is a vine. I don't like them trailing on the ground because again, it's a space thing, but it also means that your cucumbers are sitting on the ground where they're more subject to mold and rot and insects and wildlife and stuff. And then you have to come out here and look and harvest them while they're small. People sometimes take great pride in bringing some gigantic overgrown cucumber in, but by that time, the seeds are developing in there, the seeds get larger, it kind of starts to get pithy, it's not as crisp. So you're much better off. This is really close to harvest stage. I might let that expand out for another day or two, but we want to get while they're still young and crisp that's in there. Cool thing with cucumbers, and this is also other squash and melons, they have separate male and female flowers. So if you look at this one, right, you see I have this little kind of miniature cucumber that's under there, and you'll do this with squash also. That is the female flower. This one you see where there's just the bloom, that is the male flower. And a common thing that we encounter is these vines, they'll produce, boy, 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 and then but they're not producing the female flowers. And customers are coming, why, I got my vine, it's growing, I got pollinators present, everything's working, but we'll go home and we'll find that it has not been producing the female flowers. So that's kind of a normal thing. Well, they'll produce male flowers at first, and then they kind of start producing females after that. So I'm always kind of looking for that. This is also like my sort of like natural science, botanical kind of outdoor classroom thing. It also, if we're not getting pollination, or if we don't have the insects and pollinators present, this is where you actually need to go and take the pollen from the boy family, from the boy flower, and that can be a little Q-tip brush, or you can just pick the flower off and transfer it over to the female flower and then do that self-pollination that's in here. So we see that kind of thing go on that's there. This is kind of what I was alluding to most of all, is these plants are highly susceptible to mildew diseases. It's just going to happen to us because mildew, we're in that 75, 85 degree temperature, high humidity range, boom, it shows up. So if I have these plants growing, I don't want to be spraying fungicides or trying to pamper or kind of revive this declining plant this is where I prefer, if I can, just have a succession of plants. So by the time I've gotten my use out of plant A, it goes into the compost bin and I move on to plant B and so on. So that's really to me, a preferred management technique as opposed to, going down the fungicide route, that kind of thing. So I'm going to take a little bit of when I say a break here, what I really want to do is take a question break and see if you guys have any thoughts or anything you want to add or anything I can clarify on that. And Kristen, how are we doing there? Any questions coming in?
Doing great. And so far, no one's mowing their lawn. So we're doing really well. Do you have an opinion on, I'm going to spell it, Kaolin, clay?
Yeah, I got opinions on everything.
Well, yes.
So I have never used the kaolin clay. I have heard very, very good things about it. A lot of organic orchardists use this. They've always had very good feedback on it. It's been tested and evaluated by USDA, so I am like all thumbs up, all on board with it. The issue that I have and why I haven't used it is, I'll say that I'm aware of, it's only available in large quantities, kind of commercial sized quantities. For those of you that may not know, so kaolin clay particles are tiny, tiny, tiny. It's just, from the soil. But essentially it's sprayed onto fruits and vegetables and it creates a physical barriers there. So it's this very thin layer of clay, just natural product on there, and that helps to protect the plant from fungal and insect disease problems. So it's everything I know is positive, upbeat, good. The question comes down really is just availability. We do not have at Maryfield Garden Center, we don't have any kind of available suppliers in smaller kind of retail residential size packaging. I think some people have been able to find small packaging, but I don't exactly know where. So yeah, thumbs up, fantastic if you can do it. But what I've seen is it's in larger quantities that doesn't really lend itself to small home size gardens.
Fantastic. So another question is, they're growing the herbs, starting them in an AeroGarden hydroponic system, and then they're trying to transplant them into soil, and they're not making the transfer very well. Do you have ideas, thoughts?
Kind of yes and no. I have not used the AeroGarden again. What I've seen is very, very good, very, very impressive. I mean, in terms of the plants come out really strong, healthy, and fast. And I'm saying, I'm all on board, I'm supportive. When you say transplanting, what I would be doing, looking at plants, I would take that little AeroGarden seedling and put it into potting mix at first. I don't think I want to go straight into outdoor kind of clay soil, but I put them into a pot, maybe grow them there a little bit additionally, get a little bit of size to them. And then there's also what we call this hardening off process. If a plant has spent its life indoors in a sheltered, protected environment, we can't just suddenly plop it into the ground outside because it's not adapted to outside environment, things like wind and temperature extremes like that. So what we call hardening off, I now want to take my little tender baby plant and acclimate it. I mean, maybe I put those pots then into a sheltered environment where it doesn't get the full direct onslaught of sun, where it's sheltered from the wind, and over a period of about a week, gradually get it acclimated to the outdoors. So I'm making a guess here, but you might be just this hardening off process is where things are going wrong. And we all have had trouble with that, where we just, hey, we nurture these plants, we grow them, put them outside, but it'd be no different than if I always say, if I go down there and lay out on the beaches of Cancun, I'm not adapted to that. I'm going to burn. So it's something that we kind of have to acclimate ourselves to. So hopefully that's all it is. It's a matter of getting these plants hardened off. All right. Do we have any others?
Yes. Two questions related to squash. Every year they are getting, and I just flipped, my question just flipped, but squash vine borers, but they're changing their soil, and they were wondering if you had any other recommendations. And the other question is, how frequently should one fertilize squash, if at all?
I do. I was kind of anticipating almost the squash vine borer, which is a really devastating, hard to control insect pest, and I've got a couple slides we get back to. Uh, one one thing I have had success with, and this is what you'll see in the slides, is what's called a floating row cover, where it's a very lightweight blanket that you'll see, and we can literally put that over the plant. It allows sun, air, and water to get through, but it prevents insect pests from getting into it. It's tricky to use this on squash. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I will keep that blanket on the plant until such time as the plant it's had time to mature, it's flowering, and then at that point I need to open it up. I need to bring that blanket off of it that allows the pollinators to get into it. The one time I had success with it, I really got into it and was tracking what we call the growing degree days. So I was able to track and find there's sort of a sweet spot where after the squash is matured and is flowering, and after the vine borers have finished their egg laying, that we can pull the blanket off and get some squash to go. So that's kind of a complicated way, but it's a way of doing it without any kind of spraying or treatment. Something I'm going to share with you, I pulled off of the shelf at our Fair Oak store. I haven't seen these at the other locations. This is something brand new. I haven't even opened or looked at it, as you can see here. This is a vine borer lure. This is something that commercial growers do. And I was kind of excited to see that we now have it here for kind of a home gardener thing. This uses a pheromone lure. The adult is a moth. And so it's a pheromone lure that attracts the moths over here because they think they're going to find their mate, and they get stuck in a little glue trap that's available. So we're capturing the adult moth before they've had an opportunity to mate or lay eggs. I don't want to like give an endorsement because I haven't actually used it, and it's brand new for us anyway, but this has been in use for commercial people for a number of years, and I love it because we're not doing any spraying or any treatments that's on there. What I'll call now my third option that's in there is an organic insecticide that's called spinosad. I brought this, hopefully we can see that in quick. This is what's called spinosad soap. It's two different, it's insecticidal soap, and it's mixed with spinosad, which is a microbial insecticide, and it does very good on controlling caterpillars, things like, corn earworms, cabbage looper, and squash vine borer. With squash vine borer, you can get spinosad in a powdered form, and I would be putting that powder along the base of the vine. All this has to be done preventatively. This has to be done before the vine borer gets into that stem. But you have these options that are available, and it's a challenge because, again, that vine borer is a moth. They lay their eggs into the stem of the plant, and then that caterpillar goes chewing in there, and there goes, that's the end of your squash vine. In terms of fertilizer, and this is kind of generalized, I'm saying this for whether it's tomatoes, squash, peppers, or whatever. I'm going to give a little bit of a bias. I do like to use organics. We have several options that are available to you. This is one, True Organics. It's using things like, it's got poultry manure, seabird guano, fish bone meal, sulfate potash, soybean meal, crab shell meal, shrimp meal, and the list goes on. Espoma makes one called Garden Tone, which is very similar. It's also a very good product. But I think about once every 4 to 6 weeks is a good kind of target to follow, of just putting some fertilizer on there. Because again, that's kind of a heavy fertilizer program, but we're trying to get a lot of productivity out of our plants. So go for it. All right, what's our next question?
Since we already talked about tomatoes, this is a question about tomatoes grown in pots. Their leaves are curling up. They're not spots or mildew, but the leaves just tend to roll up.
That can really even be characteristic of the plant itself. I was looking at these couple examples I brought in. Some of the heirloom ones, like this is what they call, this is a type of brandy wine, it has what we call potato leaf. Leaf looks a little simpler on. Now I know yours is rolling up. This is kind of rolling down. But I'm thinking a lot of times that's just characteristic of the plant. Aphids are out now. This seems early, but we've had samples of aphids coming into the plant clinic. If they're sucking on juice out of leaf, that could cause rolling and curling. But aphids, you can see that. So I'm guessing that you would have looked at or seen that. So thinking it's more of environmental stress that's in there. Severe curling, which is a totally different kind of a deal. Tomatoes are really sensitive to broadleaf weed killers, herbicides. And I'm thinking about this because it happened to moi. My garden hit pretty bad the last couple of weeks. If people are out applying broadleaf weed killers to lawn areas and it's a windy day, the slightest little bit of drift over there can lead to distortion and curling. So that would be a good thing to maybe send some pictures in because it could be a pest problem, but that could also just be nature of the plant.
Sorry, the unmute button. So there was
I see you taking notes. That's okay.
yeah.
There.
The question was about what's a good early growing tomato, because they seem to come in the third week in August when she's at the beach. And also, do seed brands matter when selecting tomatoes, or any seeds really?
So I'm sure there's a lot of great early tomatoes out there. I'm just again traditionalist, been growing tomatoes since I was a child. I really do like Early Girl. I know it's been around 40, 50 years, but Early Girl is a nice tomato, kind of mid-sized, does come in a little sooner. It has a little, sometimes people might call an acidic taste to it, but that's what I like. I like that more than just the mild flavor that's in there. So Early Girl is a name that I'll give you, but there are many other choices. As far as brands of seed, and I'll talk a little bit again if we have time on seed growing. So we like at the garden center, we sell, I think it's 5 or 7 different companies or brands of seed that's in there. I look at it a couple ways. One is I really value the information that's provided with the seeds. So I'll look at a company like this is Renee's garden as well. So like Renee's and Botanical Interest are 2 companies. One of the reasons I like them is that I'll just show you in the back. Look, you can't, maybe you can see a little fine print here. I know you're not going to read it, but it's like a whole library of information on how to germinate, grow, the ideal conditions. They have great support on Botanical Interest. I use their website as a resource. So I really appreciate the information that they provide. They also kind of a little bit of a target some of the more unusual varieties that are out there. So I just randomly, like I picked this Moon and Stars watermelon that's in here. So they'll have interesting varieties. They give great support information. Seed is really inexpensive. I can't sometimes, so like this package is $4.49. It's not a big deal. It's in there, but some of these cost a little bit more. I am also a big believer, and I will often encourage when I talk to people in store. I usually go to Lake Valley's display first. Lake Valley, what I have found kind of through my own shopping and growing stuff, they tend to be kind of more your standard fare. They have like the sort of tried and true varieties that are in there. But what I like about them and why I tend to go to that rack first is I think they're the best value. They actually have more seeds in their package. Their prices are better, and they have very, very good quality seed. It all germinates. But sometimes if you're looking for certain varieties or older heirloom varieties, they may not have it available. So that's some of these specialty companies. And again, so I know I'm throwing a bunch of names at you, but cornucopia is a little bit of a specialist seed mix. If we get to talk about green beans, like I like this provider bush beans. So these are all good quality seeds. Some of them I think offer you better value, and a lot of it's based on the selection that's there. So that's a long-winded answer. There's also like Southern Exposure, which is a regional thing. These all give you good seeds, but you'll find some have a little better value than others as far as price goes. Let's see if we have time maybe for another question, and then I'm just the next set of slides I'm gonna hit real quick. They won't be as detailed.
Yeah, so we'll do this one. It's 3 questions combined, and our question count just jumped to 14. So I'm going to try and consolidate some of them. There are 2 questions related to the mix that you would put in for raised beds. So one person asked they're using 100% bumper crop and they want to know if they should mix it. Someone else is using 75% potting mix and 25% bumper crop or coast of Maine for potting tomatoes and peppers. And along the same line, just to get these 3 questions in, how much lime should you add to a raised garden bed to prevent end rot? And then we'll.
All right, so I always say it's like cooking. Everybody's got different recipes, not right or wrong. Bumper crop is compost. There's no actual soil in there. So I really prefer to use that as a soil conditioner amended to soil, whether it's a potting mix or in the ground. This past summer, because I was using what I had, and I'm just going to go with what's on site. I grew a tomato in 100% bumper crop, exactly like one of our customers did. You can do it, but I don't think that's really the best. Didn't give the sort of best products because again, it's meant as a soil conditioner. So its drainage properties and such are probably not ideal to use by itself. I feel like I get better results for containers where I actually have a potting mix, which may have things like perlite and bark and things to enhance and improve the drainage. And then I add bumper crop to that to increase the nutritional value of that's in there. So that's what I kind of like best. When we start talking about raised garden beds, the first question I'm going to find out from you is really the size of the garden beds that you're creating. Because what I'm doing in my mind is I need to figure out, am I talking about bulk materials or am I talking about bag materials? And this has a lot to do also with price and convenience. It's in there. In a general rule, if you need 1 cubic yard or more of material, I'm going to go the route of bulk topsoil and amending that soil with either like the Coast of Maine raised bed mix or bumper crop. These products are very similar and interchangeable. That's in there. If I am going less than that, then I'm probably still talking about topsoil, but it will be the bag topsoil and amending that with things like bumper crop or the Coast of Maine raised garden beds. They're really good products. I just kind of recite bumper crop because that's kind of what I have most experience with. In terms of lime that you would put in there, this would be kind of the high rate, would be sort of 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So you can kind of do the math and come down to that. If we're talking about like just growing a tomato in a pot, we're talking about like a half of a cup stirred into the soil or something like that. And let's do this, Kristen. I'm going to go back and just hit these next few slides really quick because they're more about bugs and beans and stuff like that. And then we will get back into our questions because I really like the questions more than listening to my slides. But hey, I prepared and we'll do them. So real quick, I want to hit a couple other veggies on there. Green beans. Because again, this is kind of random. It's what I've grown and used and like, and so that's how decisions came through. If we have garden plot and we're trying to sort of maximize productivity, there's always like, hey, I want a succession of crops. My spring crops are done, put some summer crops in there, get summer crops out, put some fall crops in, do that kind of rotation and stuff. If I ever find myself where I have bare ground, if I got some space in the garden and a little bit of time, green beans go in there. I find this to be like one of the fastest, easiest, most productive vegetables that you can grow. And I love green beans. Not some kids don't stuff. But when we talk about green beans, there's bush types and pole types. The pole bean, again, is a vine. It has to be supported on something. And the pole bean, you would harvest all summer long. So it's kind of occupying that space and you're maintaining the plant through the entire summer. But they also tend to have the best flavors. So there's trade-off. What I tend to grow a lot of, because I'm after the easy stuff, are bush beans. These stay smaller. They might max out at about 18, 24 inches tall, so they take up less space. And the thing that's so great about them is that you can literally go from planting a seed to be able to harvest that in a period of like maybe as quick as 6 weeks or something. So where I have this opportunity, I love to put green beans in there, and you can start. Like I said, what they really like put it in here is you can see soil temperatures look right that 60, 70 degrees. Like I said, we're kind of at that 70 degrees as of today and right now. So again, warm soil, sunny conditions, and you can just kind of wherever you get a chance, just plant more beans. I've even planted beans as late as August or even into September and still been able to get a crop out of it before the end of the season. They do have some insect pests. The number one is the Mexican bean beetle. And so this is the larvae, the pupa, and the adult. If you're growing beans, you're going to have to deal with bean beetles. With insects, and we talk about bean beetles, plant bugs, stink bugs kind of doing this damage. This is the floating row cover that I was talking about. I like these row covers, have nothing but good stories and good success rate with it. The thing you don't see them used that often is there's nothing pretty, nothing attractive about it. But we can plant our beans or whatever we're growing, plant it, let that plant grow. When we reach the flowering stage, I need to open this up so the pollinators can get to it. But by this time, those plants have already had a head start. They've had a chance to get themselves established. And I find that they're just much more pest resistant at that point in time. Quickly, transplants versus direct seeding, because we talked about this both. If you're getting started, you sort of have a choice. I can go out and I can buy a plant, like I just brought here. What have I got? So little watermelon plants, right? So this is a transplant, little seedlings. I can buy a transplant. After it gets a little bit acclimated, go, boom, pump it in the ground and grow. That's one option that's available to you. The other we talked about is like, hey, I can buy a packet of seeds and direct sow them into there. A lot of these things that I'm talking about, things like squash, cucumbers, beans, melons, this and that, they grow so fast from a seed. If you plant them in warm soil, boom, they'll germinate and they'll grow and they'll sprout and growing. So you can go from a seed to a little seedling like this in probably 3 weeks' time. So a lot of those, I would rather just direct sow into the ground because they establish quickly, they're easy, and seeds are really inexpensive. But maybe you only want 1 or 2 plants. You don't have the space to do it. You don't want to mess around with germinating seeds. You can just buy transplants and put it in. If I am growing plants like tomatoes we talked about, that takes more time. This little seedling is probably closer to 6 weeks old. I don't have 6 weeks that I want to wait around. I don't have 6 weeks that I want to spend growing this from seed today. You could do it, but why not go get a plant that's already ahead of that, put it in there. So what they're putting a transplant in, what you're doing in my view is you're buying time that's there. So I could go out and plant seeds today, but why do I want to do that? Time's passing. I'd rather buy a transplant, put it in, and then get faster results that's out there. So again, it's not a right, wrong, or one way or the other. This again is the earth box. And what I did was planted a tomato, you can see growing up in here, and then I scattered seed, a mix of different types of basil and below. So, hey, you can mix and match and do whatever floats your boat, so to speak, on that. Basil's a favorite of mine also, but what happened to us several years ago, there's a disease called basil downy mildew that got in there. And the problem is this is on the underside of the leaves. It gets in there and it kills this plant dead. Again, warm, moist environments is there. Plus, once it gets there, it contaminates the soil, it can persist for several years. That took that really made it very hard growing basil for several years. But over time now, a lot of disease-resistant varieties have been developed. This is one of the first ones that came out called Amazel basil, and it is amazing. This plant was huge. It was productive. It's extremely disease-resistant. This kind of shows you before picture. I chopped it back, made a bowl of pesto from that one plant. It grew back, and I did this 2 more times off that same plant in the same season. Thing is that kind of didn't work quite as well for me is it's kind of a tough leathery leaf. It's not as flavorful as some of the others. But since that time, the breeders keep developing new and newer varieties. So Rutgers University is out there producing, I think, better disease-resistant varieties for us. So this is one that just came in today, for example, called Prospera Compact, and it says DMR, downy mildew resistant. When you look at this, you can feel the leaf is not quite as tender. It's not quite as soft and stuff as the typical sweet Genovese basil, but they're getting better all the time. And I 100% would be steering you towards getting disease-resistant varieties, compromising just a little bit on the flavor and taste that goes with it. I talked a lot about bumper crop. I just want to put this picture up here to finish our conversation because I've talked about enough. This kind of gives you a list of what's in there, and you can sort of see why I talk about it so much. Now, I know there's a ton of questions in only a few minutes, so let's see what we can do.
Fantastic. The age-old question: how do I protect my seedlings and tender plants from rabbits, deer, any?
Yeah, so we've got some pretty good rabbit and deer repellents. One of those I've had good luck with is dried blood, which is also an organic fertilizer, good source of nitrogen. They tend to not like the smell of that because I don't really want to spray anything directly on my plants. Because like Peggy always says, hey, if it keeps the deer away, it's going to keep you away too. So I prefer to use like granular products that I can sprinkle around the ground. There's a bunch of them called Deer Scram, Liquid Fence. So a lot of these have dried blood in them, and they all work pretty well. The problem I still have is like birds and squirrels because they're coming up onto the plants. They're not ground level. But those products, most of them will last anywhere from about 2 to 4 weeks, depending how much you water. But yeah, stuff I see is we got good, easy answers for that one.
Fantastic. This is a question: when is the earliest to plant collards, and should they be sown directly or started in cells?
Collards, I would prefer to just sow directly in the ground. It makes better sense. I feel like you could start today. This is kind of like the early. I always say there's not an end date. There's a beginning date. So this would be like the earliest. This would be the early time. They're pretty cold tolerant, so I think you could do that now. Again, go to that Greencast online if you want to check your soil temperatures. But we're right at about 70 degrees, so I'm going to say from today onwards, and this is when we can begin planting. But hey, you could keep planting the next week, next month. You can keep planting even in the summer, but we can begin now.
And the last 2 questions, I know they're your favorite, and you've been fielding a lot of these related to winter damage and cold damage. And the other one is, where did the insects come from that are eating the plants?
I'll talk about the insects first. Where do they come from? So different insects, they have all these different ways of what we call overwintering. How are they going to survive the winter? Some of them survive as adults where they just crawl up under bark or logs or rocks and kind of hunker down and find a place to spend the winter. A good example that you might know is like, now these are good guys, but like ladybugs. Ladybugs, not so good guys, stink bugs. You'll find sometimes they come into your house. What they do is they are just looking for some kind of nice, dry, warm place to stay. And they'll come in, they might get into your window sills or little cracks and crevices. And then inadvertently you find them in your house and you're wondering, why is this cricket or this stink bug in my home? Well, in a natural environment, of course, they'd be crawling under a rock or a wood pile or something like that for shelter, but that could also include your house. Others will overwinter as eggs. So maybe at the end of the season, they laid eggs, and those eggs can survive the cold weather and temperatures and survive as an egg that's in there. Others would call it a pupal phase, which is kind of like, hey, I'm that's kind of between an egg and an adult, in that kind of transformational phase of a good way to think about that would be a cocoon. Like if we're talking about cabbage worm, for example, that's a moth. A lot of our squash vine borers, that's a moth. Their pupa, squash vine borer, for example, will persist in the soil as a pupa. And then as the temperatures warm, it emerges out of the ground as a moth. So they have hiding places, survival places, and they can overwinter in any of those forms. Part of this, and you'll never be completely effective, this part where I say cleanup, sanitation, any old stuff that's laying on the ground, cleaning that up is always a good beginning point to manage insect pests. Well, as far as winter damage goes, somebody told me that this was the coldest winter we've had in about the past 10 years. Most of what I have been seeing at the plant clinic, and we've seen a lot of this, is winter damage. Very few plants have been winter killed. Some of those plants are just now beginning to come out of the winter damage. The past 3 or 4 days, we've had warm, sunny days where we're going up into 80-degree temperatures. So just this morning, I was looking at somebody that had damaged camellias. And I'm trying to look at them saying, I just saw for the very first time, we're beginning to see some little leaves emerge from there. What they need is more warm, sunny weather. So I've been trying to coach everybody is just to be patient, give these more time. I've had some times where you don't really see the recovery begin even until June. So most of these plants, I think, are going to recover, but it's going to require some of this warm weather. If we get warm, sunny days, when I know, okay, this is alive, this is dead, this is not coming back, then we can go in and prune out the dead stuff, maybe fertilize the plants to encourage regrowth. But I think most of what I've seen from azaleas and magnolias and laurels to other stuff, they're coming back. Some of the marginal things like loropetalum, they're coming back, but some of them have been killed off. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag out there. I should also say that the USDA just came out recently with its newest hardiness zone rating. This kind of gives us an idea of what we can anticipate as our kind of average cold temperatures based over the past 30 years. We are now, at least here in Fairfax County, we are now officially a zone warmer than we were last year. We are now moved into zones 7B. When I was born, I was in zone 6B. So I haven't moved, but the zones have moved. So all this stuff keeps changing. We kind of just keep adapting to it. And so we're growing more of these zone 8s, more of these southern plants that we're introducing and have been into our landscape. And we kind of got zapped this year. And I'm kind of going down this diversion, but I find all this stuff kind of like interesting. I love sharing information about. But I think most of the stuff out there is going to survive. It just got beat up.
Fantastic. We're at 3:03. If there are questions that we didn't get answered yet, if you want to send your email, I'll stay on for a minute and I'll get those answers written down. And you can always come to our plant clinic or call our plant clinic. And also on our website, we have a contact us. And there are several of us that pull those questions down, and we send a lot of them to David for answers. So we try to be reachable because we want you to have success and love the plants. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was recorded. It will be on our website or wherever it goes. I'm so sorry. In like the next 24 hours. And thank you all for attending today.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And thanks for being here, Kristen. And I look forward to seeing each of you here at the Garden Center in person or on Zoom.